Good afternoon. My name is Rachel House-Binnington, and I am project coordinator and one of the field archivists for the AIM25 Yerusha Mapping Jewish London project. And I'm here this afternoon with Nicola Avery of the London Metropolitan Archives, who will tell us a bit about her role and about LMA.
I'm one of the principal archivists at London Metropolitan Archives. We deal with the acquisitions and the cataloguing, so we take in new deposits and gifts of archives and we catalogue them to make them available for the public. So we are responsible for the online catalogue as well as the paper catalogues.
With COVID, how has your service been operating?
We have managed to keep going. During the first lockdown, all of the staff were working from home, and it had some benefits for us because it enabled us to get a lot of old indexes on index cards and old interim lists for material that we hadn't catalogued that came in decades ago.
So then what are your plans for reopening?
We don't yet have a date for reopening. We are hoping, fingers crossed and with a following wind, mid-May-ish, we will be able to reopen. But as yet, we don't have a specific date, and it will be the same as it was last summer and autumn. So it will be pre-booked researchers only. We will only be able to accommodate a few researchers in our archive study area, looking at a restricted number of items.
Could you talk a bit about your specific remit in what LMA does and collects and the reach that you have?
Yes, certainly. Well, we have a number of different teams within LMA who have different responsibilities. So we have a front of house team who work with the public. We have a very strong engagement and learning team who work with the communities. They deal with our education programs and all of the engagement work that we do with the public and with communities. We have a digital services team, and then we have the conservation team, obviously, who do physical repair and conservation surveys. And my responsibility is for the collections team. And as I say, we take in records and catalogue them for the public. So in terms of our collecting remit, we hold local government records for Greater London and for the City of London. As I say, we're administered by the city, but we started life under the London County Council and the Middlesex County Council back in the late 19th century. Businesses is very strong for us through our links with Guildhall Library, because Square Mile obviously has so many financial institutions, major financial institutions, some of which do not have their own archive. So we've got some fantastic banking and insurance records. And we have a very strong collection of Jewish archives that we hold here that we're very proud of. So it's a real speciality for us, I think, and that's why we were so keen to be involved with the AIM25 Yerusha project.
Does the AIM25 database itself generate a lot of users for you that you wouldn't traditionally get coming through the LMA websites themselves? And how does the relationship between the LMA and AIM25 work?
LMA is a member of AIM25. For us, AIM25 and the portal particularly was really useful because it holds collection level descriptions. So I think it can help us to target our audiences and find the best audiences for the material that we hold. We have our own electronic catalogue, but it works at all levels, from collection level down to item level, and it has getting on for 6 million records in it. So it can be a little bit difficult to see the wood from the trees if you're a researcher and you're putting a keyword into LMA's catalogue. You're pulling back so many results that it can be quite difficult for you actually to pinpoint what you're really interested in. But AIM25 deals only at the collection level, and so it's cleaner in a way. It allows you to pull back the results that are going to be most relevant to you, and that's one of the reasons that we thought it would be really useful for us to have our collection descriptions on the AIM25 portal. With Yerusha specifically, just to give you a little bit of background of our experiences before the AIM25 project and with Yerusha, we've been lucky enough over the last few years to get grants, cataloguing grants and conservation grants from Rothschild Foundation to deal with our Jewish collections. We have been able, with those grants, to clear our Jewish cataloguing backlog, which is amazing, because before that we had huge backlogs. We have such large depositors, think organisations like the United Synagogue, the Board of Deputies of British Jews, the Office of Chief Rabbi. They're enormous organisations, and they generate hundreds of meters of archives, and it all comes to us. And so we've been unable, using our own resources, to get everything catalogued. But with these grants, we've been able to clear the United Synagogue. We also were able to employ conservators as part of those grants as well, and to run conservation surveys over the material to see what needs repairing, and actually then physically to repair them. So our Jewish collections are now looking in really good shape. On top of that, we had some time during this project to contact our Jewish depositors and try to work with them to make the collections as open as possible. Some of our Jewish depositors ask that researchers go to them for permission before viewing material, and we can absolutely understand why that is the case. But we did have some successes over the course of those projects with some of our depositors who said, actually, when we asked the question, they started thinking and thought, wow, why do we have this restriction? And they've allowed us to take it off. That was another benefit, real benefit of the Rothschild project. But one of the things that Rothschild asked us to do in return was to submit collection level descriptions for what we had catalogued to Yerusha. So we said, fine, happy to do that, no trouble at all. So we started working with Gabor Kadar at Yerusha to get those collection descriptions in. We found it such an easy process, and because we're used to the way AIM25 works as a collection portal, we were very comfortable with the process, and we ended up submitting not just the material that we'd catalogued as part of these grants, but all of our Jewish collections. So we had all of our Jewish collection level descriptions up on Yerusha, which we now have done. And so we were really interested in AIM25's work with Yerusha, particularly because we wanted to branch out a little bit and try and pinpoint material that was going to be of interest to Jewish researchers, but that didn't necessarily come from a Jewish collection.
The process itself of going through that kind of data aggregation and then not getting the field component that we had all hoped for, was that disappointing for LMA, or do you feel like everyone understands the circumstances across the heritage sector?
I think that everybody has been in the same boat, and we've been struggling. We haven't been able to do what we've wanted to do necessarily over the last year, but I think in spite of that, there have been some real wins for us in pulling out some of our non-Jewish collections and having them available through the AIM25 portal. There was one example that I was really keen to contribute to this particular project, because it was something that we learned about purely serendipitously. About a year ago, we found a document on our network. We're not entirely sure who wrote it, where it came from, but it turned out to be so interesting, so useful, and it allowed us to learn something about one of our collections that we just hadn't known before. And as a result of that, we could contribute it to the Yerusha project, and it will now be available for people to research, and they wouldn't have known about it before. The collection is the Committee of London Clearing Banks. It's part of the British Bankers Association archive, and you wouldn't think there would be an enormous amount of Jewish content in something like that, but we discovered that the committee it had in its archive some extraordinary material around the bank's policies in administering the Trading with the Enemy Act during the Second World War. And the Holocaust Education Trust had been researching into these archives in an effort to try and find out if assets from the Jewish community which had been frozen during the war had been restored to their rightful owners. And we're finding that sometimes they hadn't been, and why not, and how could something be done about this? And although there wasn't any information about individual account holders in the London Clearing Bank's archive, there was a lot of information about the bank's policies around this, and they were able to get a lot of useful information out of it. And so it's an aspect of that particular collection that we had no idea about, but is so useful to Jewish researchers, the Holocaust researchers as well. So we're really pleased to be able to contribute that one.
Do you think that there are more collections like that hiding and we just didn't have the opportunity or the time to really dig in deep?
There's going to be more. There's certainly going to be more out there. What I would have loved to have done, and it was a shame that we weren't able to because of COVID, but obviously we absolutely understand that it wasn't possible, is to have a really good and close look at our local government collections, because I'm sure that in the Greater London Council archive particularly, there is going to be material there, and its predecessors as well, the London County Council and the Middlesex County Council. With the LCC and the MCC, they're pretty much catalogued, so I think anything we were going to find has probably been catalogued, although I think there is still scope to investigate further into the records themselves and do some catalogue enhancement there. But with the Greater London Council, we haven't yet 100% catalogued that one. And I think amongst that GLC and catalogue material, there is going to be more useful information. The Inner London Education Authority as well, which administered Jewish schools as well as non-Jewish schools. But by and large, I think we're really happy with what the AIM25 team have pulled out for the Yerusha project. It's really nice collections there that can complement our exclusive Jewish ones, which are already up there on the portal.
Going forward with AIM25, do you see more room for collaboration? And how important are the young archivists who are coming into AIM25 as a resource?
I certainly hope that there will be a lot of more scope in the future to do similar projects like this, and to make use of the young archivists that are coming through. I mean, new archivists are being minted all the time. They're coming through the courses all the time, and their experiences are going to be very different from those of us in the older generation. When I was on the course, we were learning medieval paleography, which was brilliant, but we weren't learning an enormous amount about digital records. Whereas archivists coming through the courses now, digital records are their bread and butter. They know so much more than I do. I have taken over responsibility for digital records here at LMA, and it's been a steep learning curve for me because it's not what I grew up with. So we really need to harness the experiences and the skills that younger archivists have, particularly I think around digital records, to try and give as good an experience for our researchers as we possibly can. And I think there's so much scope for future projects that AIM25 can lead on, and I hope that LMA can help with. I think AIM25 is such a wonderful organisation for the smaller repositories, as I said at the beginning, to be able to come together and use their combined efforts to run projects that are going to be of benefit to as many repositories as possible, and therefore to as many researchers as possible who are going to be able to learn more about what we hold.